Welcome to the Eclipse Horror Stories. Please subscribe this channel before diving into the story. When I was 9 years old, I lived with my mom and my little sister in a small house on a quiet street. Most days felt ordinary. Kids rode their bikes outside until the sun went down, and neighbors waved as they watered their gardens. From the outside, it all looked normal. But even then, I remember thinking something about that house didn't sit right with me. My mom always said, "Old houses make noises. You'll get used to it." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But some of those sounds weren't like anything a house should make. My bedroom was small, just a bed against the wall, a dresser that leaned slightly because of the uneven floor, and a toy chest near the window. At night, I'd stare at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck on the ceiling. The shadows on the walls moved whenever the branches outside swayed in the wind. I told myself that's all I was seeing, just shadows. But one night, I noticed something strange. One of the shadows wasn't moving like the others. It sat still, low in the corner near my toy chest. At first, I thought it was just a pile of clothes, or maybe one of my stuffed animals. I almost laughed at myself for being scared of nothing. But then I blinked. The shadow was gone. I froze. The kind of frozen where your body feels too heavy to move. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed that way until sleep finally came. By morning, I had almost forgotten about it. But when I looked across the room, the toy chest was wide open. My mom hated when toys were left scattered, so I never left it that way. Still, I closed it without a word and tried to convince myself I must have forgotten. A couple of weeks later, my sister, only 5 at the time, said something that made my stomach twist. She told Mom she didn't like the man in the closet. She said it as if she were talking about her doll or a classmate from school, so casual it didn't sound like she was making it up. I watched my mom brush it off, telling her little kids imagined things, but I saw the look on my sister's face. She wasn't pretending. She was scared. That same night, I woke up to a sound that still sticks with me. It was a slow dragging, like nails being pulled across the wooden floor. The sound stopped right beside my bed. I didn't dare look. I gripped the blanket so tightly my hands ached, waiting for the noise to start again. But it didn't. The next morning, I noticed something I'll never forget. Long scratches carved into the floor next to my bed. They were fresh, sharp, and deep enough to catch the light. I ran to show Mom, certain she would finally believe me. But instead of looking worried, she got angry. She said I must have been dragging something sharp or playing too rough. I swore I hadn't touched the floor, but she shook her head and walked away. The disappointment burned worse than the fear. After that, the nights got heavier. Sometimes I'd hear whispers coming from the closet, soft like a radio turned low. Other times, my sister would wake up crying, pointing at the corner of her room and saying, "He's there. He's right there." I never saw him, but I felt it. That sensation you get when you know someone is watching you. It clung to me. One winter night, I woke to find my bedroom door wide open. I always kept it shut, but now I could see the faint glow of the hallway light my mom left on. Then, as I watched, that light went out. The hallway fell into silence. Footsteps started moving toward my room. Slow, steady. They stopped just outside my door. The door creaked open, and I saw the shape of a tall figure lean in, only its head poking through. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I shut my eyes, pretending to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed. The next morning, I asked Mom if she had come in during the night. She swore she hadn't. My sister told me she saw the man standing by her bed. That was the first time Mom didn't brush it off. She lit a candle, whispered a prayer in each room, and said everything would be fine. For a little while, the house was quiet. But quiet doesn't always mean safe. For a short time after Mom lit the candle and said her prayers, the nights felt easier. I slept without waking up every hour, and my sister didn't cry out as much. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe prayers really did keep things away. But the silence never lasted long in that house. One afternoon, I came home from school before Mom did. I sat on the couch with my homework, trying not to think about the empty hallway. Then I heard it, the sound of wood slamming upstairs. My heart jumped because I knew the sound by heart. It was my toy chest. The lid had been thrown shut. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wind, but the windows were closed. Still, I forced myself to walk down the hall. The door to my room was wide open. My toy chest sat in its usual place, closed tight, but my toys weren't inside. They were scattered across the floor as if someone had dumped them out. Every piece, my action figures, building blocks, even my sister's doll I'd borrowed, was lying across the carpet. I stood in the doorway, afraid to step inside. The longer I stared, the stronger the feeling grew that someone was watching me. I backed away and waited outside until Mom came home. When I told her, she laughed a little, then said the cat must have knocked things over. We didn't even have a cat. Years later, after we moved away, Mom admitted she had seen things too. She said sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and see a shadow standing in her doorway. She claimed she kept quiet because she didn't want us to be afraid. But she was wrong. We were already afraid. I thought moving would solve it, but the next house had its own secrets. By then I was 10, and Mom had remarried. The new house was bigger, with more light and space. At first, I thought I could finally feel safe again. My new bedroom had 2 wide windows that faced the backyard, and a closet deeper than the one I'd had before. I liked the way the morning sun lit up the walls. I thought things might be different this time. That first night proved me wrong. I woke around midnight because I heard something coming from the closet. It wasn't loud, just a soft brushing sound, like clothes being moved. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the door. Then it shivered. Not wide open, not swinging, but shaking slightly, as if someone pressed against it from the inside. I didn't scream, didn't run. I just stayed there, staring until my eyes stung from not blinking. I told myself I was imagining it, but when I woke the next morning, the closet door was cracked open. I always closed it before bed. I tried to brush it off, but the nights only got worse. I started hearing tapping against the window. At first, I thought it was branches, but when I looked outside, there weren't any trees close enough. The tapping kept going, steady and patient, until I pulled the blanket over my head. Then it would stop. One night, I finally peeked. That's when I saw it. A pale hand pressed against the glass. The fingers were long and stiff, and the skin was too light, almost gray. My room was on the 2nd floor. No one could have reached that window without a ladder, but the hand stayed there, pressed flat against the glass, until it slowly slid down and disappeared. I didn't sleep a second after that. The next day, I told Mom what I'd seen. She laughed at first, thinking I was joking, but when she realized I wasn't, she tried to explain it away. She said I must have been half asleep, caught between dreaming and waking. My stepdad laughed too, saying I was making it up for attention. But later that night, I noticed he left the hallway light on. Maybe he didn't feel as safe as he pretended. A month later, my little brother, only 4 years old, started talking about the white lady. He said she came into his room at night and sat on his bed. Mom brushed it off again, saying little kids had wild imaginations. But then I heard him scream in the middle of the night. I ran into his room and found him curled up under his blanket, sobbing. When he calmed down, he said the white lady had been standing by his door, just staring. He said her eyes were all black. I believed him. For a while after my brother's scream, we tried to pretend everything was normal. Mom booked a few therapy sessions for me because she thought the fear was getting too big for a child. The therapist smiled and asked gentle questions, and I answered like I should, saying what I thought would make adults calm. But the truth was, the nights were getting stranger, not quieter. I learned to sleep with the blanket pulled up to my chin, like a shield, because it felt safer to be hidden. It wasn't a good shield, but it was something I could control. One night, during a heavy storm, the house sounded different. The rain hit the roof hard, and the wind made the gutters sing. I woke up to the sound of the window creaking. At first I thought the storm was just pressing on the house, but then I heard the lock turn. Slowly, the window opened. It moved by itself, quiet and smooth, as if something had thumbs to twist the latch. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. The window opened all the way, and I saw a pale shape come through. She didn't walk. She floated, without feet touching the sill. Her dress was long and white, and it moved as if there was a wind only around her. Her hair hung in wet strands across her face. When she leaned over the bed, her face came close to mine. Her skin was so pale that it seemed to drink the light from the room. The worst thing were her eyes, completely black, like holes. She whispered my name, and the sound was dry, like leaves rubbing together. I tried to scream, but sound would not leave me. The first thing I remember after that is my own voice suddenly breaking the room when I finally let out a scream, so loud it woke Mom and my stepdad. They burst in with the light flipping on. The window was closed and locked. No one was there. They stared at me in a way I didn't like. It was the look people give when they want to believe you, but part of them doubts. My stepdad yelled about scaring everyone and told me to stop making up stories. Mom looked frightened but also tired. She hugged me and said it was a nightmare. The next day, she called the therapist again and spoke for a long time on the phone. I heard her say words like night terrors and stress. She wanted answers that made sense, and the answers were not what I had lived. After that night, I started keeping my closet shut and avoided the window. Sometimes, when I was brave and glanced across my room in the dark, I thought I could see the white dress in the corner like a fog. Once, when I was sure I had locked the door, I woke to find the closet open and my clothes pushed aside. I did not tell them everything. Who would believe me when the window was locked and the room looked normal when the light came on? Therapy helped a little with the fear of sleeping alone, but it didn't stop the visits. The white lady came back in flashes, on stormy nights, sometimes on quiet ones too. She never spoke words I could keep. After a while, the details started to blur. A float of white, a dry voice, a pressure on my chest that felt like someone leaning with all their weight. I don't remember every single night, but I remember the moments that changed me. I remember my brother waking me by crying, and my sister clinging to Mom for comfort. I remember Mom praying in the hallway in her robe until the words were soft and tired. We stayed in that house for 3 years. I learned small ways to cope. I slept with the hallway light on, left a chair against my closet door, and kept the blinds closed. The adults tried to make routines that felt safer. They would check on us before bed and stay up later than usual during storms. Still, there were nights I would sneak out of my bed and sit on the stairs just to feel the pull of the house, to see if anything followed me there. I always wanted proof that what I felt was real in the way no one could argue with. Meanwhile, life moved on in other ways. I started riding my bike more and exploring small parts of the neighborhood I hadn't cared for before. It was during these rides that I began to notice something else. Someone else in the world who stood out like a quiet mark on a street. There was a house at the corner I passed every day. An older man used to stand in the driveway, wearing a hat and keeping watch over the sidewalk. He would call hello as I rode by. At the time, that seemed normal. Later, it would feel like another part of the same story. but very different. For now, it was a small, friendly distraction from the rooms that moved and the voices that came at night. I started to look forward to waving back. I started riding my bike every day after school. The wind on my face a small relief from the rooms that creaked and the nights that whispered. The street was quiet, and I learned every crack in the sidewalk. I knew where the mailman stopped and which houses kept their lights on late. One house down the block stuck in my head for reasons I didn't understand at first. It had a long driveway and a wide lawn, and an older man stood there most afternoons with a hat on, watching the street. He never came off the driveway or stepped onto the sidewalk. He would call out a short hello when I rode by, and that turned into a little conversation over time. The talks were always brief. He'd ask about my bike or tell a small joke. Once he made a quiet laugh about a bird that liked his fence, and I laughed with him. He seemed like someone who had time to watch small things. After a while, I started looking for him when I rode by. Some days he was there, and some days he was not. When he was there, I felt a strange calm. He knew things about my life, little things I hadn't said out loud. He asked about my little brother and about my mom's car, things I was sure I never told anyone. That made me uneasy, but I told myself maybe he saw us from his window or from down the block. One bright afternoon I rode past, and he called out, "Nice bike." He asked if I wanted to race to the corner, and I said no, Mom would be angry. He smiled and said someday, and I kept riding. He never invited me to come onto his property. He stood at the edge of his driveway, watching the road like it was a stage. Sometimes I'd slow down just to hear his voice. He had a steady, small way of talking that felt like home, a rhythm I didn't know I needed. Then one week he stopped showing up. Curtains stayed closed in his front window, and the driveway was empty. At first, I wasn't bothered. People are away sometimes. A few days later, I saw a woman working in the backyard. She had her hair tied back and a watering can in her hand. I stayed across the street and watched because that was where I felt safe. After a while, I mustered the courage to cross quickly and stand near the gate. She noticed me and came to the fence. I told her about the man with the hat, how he used to say hello, and how he seemed to know my name. She listened and wiped her hands on her dress like she had been working. Then she said something that landed in my chest like a stone. Her husband had died the year before. I felt a cold spread in my stomach. She went inside and came back with a small frame. The photo showed a man with the same hat and that same smile. I thought maybe he had been inside after all. She said the picture was recent, from a couple years ago, and that she'd moved back to tend the garden. I asked about the scar on the man's cheek. I remembered seeing sometimes when the light hit him a certain way. In the photo, the scar was clear, thin and pale. The man I'd seen on the driveway didn't have that scar. I told her I thought he'd rubbed his cheek once, maybe a trick of the light. She just shook her head slowly. She said her husband had the scar for as long as she knew him, and that he always hid it under stubble. After that, I avoided the driveway. It felt wrong to cross into a yard where a stranger used to stand, and where the line between who was there and who was not had blurred. For a time, the memory of the man was like a story I told myself at night to feel brave. Sometimes I'd think back on his small jokes and the way he watched the street, and the memory would feel like a missing piece I couldn't place. Other times I felt foolish for being scared at all, like an 8-year-old making too much of nothing. Weeks turned into months, and the street changed. Houses sold and new cars appeared. The woman's curtains opened and closed as life went on, and I found other routes to ride my bike. Still, once while lying awake, I heard a voice call my name outside my window. It sounded like that man's voice, soft and familiar. I leapt up, but when we checked the yard, there was no one there. My parents said it was the wind or that I'd been dreaming, but the sound sat in me like the taste of salt. I realized things didn't always need to be seen to be true. Some memories stayed because they had weight. They held on even when everything around them moved. Years later, when I was older and ready to leave for college, my parents sold the house, and the street changed again. I drove by once, just to look, and a child rode a bike near the corner. For a moment I wanted to stop and ask if anyone had stood in that driveway and said hello. I wanted to ask the woman if she ever heard a voice in the rain, if she'd seen a shadow lean in the hallway. But I didn't. I kept driving. The memory of that man and the houses that moved and the nights that whispered folded into a shape I could carry. It felt small enough to keep, but heavy enough to leave a mark. I thought moving away for college would loosen the grip those memories had on me. But they didn't. The new city had bright lights, busy streets, and dorm rooms full of chatter. Yet at night, when things quieted, the past crept back in. I would lie in bed and hear faint sounds, soft scratching, a tap on the window, or my name whispered low. Sometimes I'd sit up, convinced I'd see a pale hand on the glass or a tall shadow in the corner, but there was nothing there. Still, my body reacted as if it was real. I would break into a sweat and feel the same cold crawl inside me that I'd felt as a child. It wasn't every night. Weeks could pass in peace, but then it would return suddenly, like it had been waiting. I tried to convince myself it was stress or just leftover fear from childhood, but then I'd remember the scratches in the floor, my sister's face when she talked about the man in the closet, or the photo of the man with the scar. Too many pieces, each from a different time, each impossible to explain away. One Thanksgiving, I went home for a few days. Mom, my stepdad, my sister, and my brother were all there. We sat around the table, and it felt almost normal. After dinner, when most of the plates were cleared, my sister leaned close and asked, "Do you still remember the closet?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. She said she'd been dreaming about it again, the same way she used to. My brother overheard and added, "Sometimes I still see her, the white lady, in my sleep." He said it like it was nothing, but his eyes didn't look calm. We never told Mom that night. She had tried so hard to keep her steady back then, and I didn't want to drag her back into it. But it shook me. We had grown up, and still those shadows followed. They had become a part of us. Later that week, I walked by my old street. The house where the man in the driveway used to stand looked the same, but different. New paint, new cars, but the same long stretch of concrete leading to the road. I slowed down and stood at the corner where I used to wave. For a moment, I almost thought I saw him, just a faint outline. A man in a hat standing tall where the driveway met the street. I blinked and it was gone, but the familiar cold settled into me. That inside cold that doesn't come from the air. That night, I stayed in my old room at Mom's house. It had been turned into a guest room, with a different bed and fresh curtains. The closet was still there. I told myself it was just wood and space, nothing more. But when the house quieted and the hum of voices downstairs faded, I couldn't take my eyes off the door. It was shut, but I kept waiting for it to tremble, just slightly, like it had when I was 10. I barely slept, listening to the house breathe around me. Back at school, the memories pressed harder. It was as if returning home had stirred them up again. In lectures, I caught myself drifting, thinking about all three places. My first room with the toy chest, the second with the white lady at the window, and the driveway with the man who knew my name. They weren't separate stories anymore. They tangled together, making me wonder if they were connected. The same presence in different shapes. Maybe not a house or a street, but something that followed us. One night in my dorm, I woke up and found my door cracked open. I always locked it. The hallway outside was empty, but I could feel eyes on me. I stayed awake until morning, pretending to study, but watching the door, waiting for a shadow to lean in. By sunrise, nothing had happened, but the unease never left. That's when I realized moving away hadn't ended it. Whatever this was, it didn't stay behind. It stayed with me. It stayed with me in small ways at first. An uneasy feeling in crowds, a hesitation before opening a closet, a quick glance at windows when it rained. But as years went by, the feeling grew into something sharper. I decided to go back once more, not just to drive by, but to step inside the places I'd left. I told myself I needed answers. Maybe if I saw the rooms again, I could pin down what had scared me and put it away for good. The house on our old street was up for sale. Someone had asked me to go through it and take inventory of old things before the new owners moved their furniture in. It was a practical reason, a simple task that gave me permission to be there. When I opened the front door, the smell of old paint and dust hit me. The same smell I remembered from years ago, but sharper, as if all the years had collected in the corners. The floorboards creaked like old knees. I walked around with a clipboard and a flashlight, checking rooms and cupboards, making a list of chipped porcelain and loose screws. My hand shook, but I kept going. The first room I reached was my old bedroom. Sunlight fell through the curtains in neat strips. The toy chest sat where it always had, but this time the lid was closed. I told myself that seeing it would calm me. I told myself I was ready to be practical and unemotional. I set the clipboard on the bed and walked over. When I put my hand on the lid, it was warm, like someone had touched it earlier. My breath caught. I opened it slowly. Inside were toys, but not the ones I remembered. Newer toys, as if someone else had used the chest in the years since. Yet at the bottom, half hidden under a plastic car, were deep scratches in the wood, the same kind that had been by my bed when I was 9. They looked fresh, raw, as if someone had carved them last week. I pressed my palm against the marks, and the past slid back over me like cold water. I did not expect the tears, but they came. The closet door was just as it always was, paint slightly chipped at the bottom, a line where the floor had bowed under the weight for years. I hesitated, then stepped in front of it. I felt foolish, like a child again, but I pulled the door open. Clothes had been stacked neatly on hangers. A pair of old shoes sat at the bottom. My heartbeat kept time with the small dust motes. I reached to touch the shoes and felt a light cold on my fingers, like a breath. The hairs on my arm rose. I heard a noise from upstairs, soft and patient. It could have been the house settling. It might have been nothing. But as I turned to leave, the closet door moved on its own, closing with a quiet click. I froze, and for a moment every plan I made about being brave unraveled. I put my hand to the door and felt its cool paint through my fingers. When I opened it again, there was a single item I didn't expect. A small, worn doll with one eye missing. It lay on top of the shoes, staring up with its remaining glass gaze. I carried the doll downstairs, where the woman who rented the house came in from the garden. She looked up when I walked in and asked if I'd found anything of value. I told her about the scratches and the doll. Her face changed, not with surprise, but with something heavier. She set down her watering can and told me in a low voice that strange things had been happening. Windows would open at night. Footsteps would pass by empty rooms. She hadn't told the real estate agent because she feared they would think she made it up. Hearing her say those words out loud felt like a confirmation. Then she told me something I had not expected. She said one night, a few months ago, she had seen a hand press against the upstairs window. It was pale and slow, leaving a faint hollow on the glass like someone had leaned there for a long time. She wiped it away and thought nothing of it until she found wet streaks tracing down the frame the next morning. She lived alone and had no children. She said she hoped it was just a branch or a trick of light, but the taste of worry stayed with her. She led me outside and pointed to the driveway. The concrete had a dark patch, as if rain had collected there in a way that made the whole strip look like a shadow. I felt that same cold spread through me. I realized then that going back hadn't given me answers. It had only lifted the cover enough to see how much was still underneath. Before I left, I walked up the street to the corner house with the long driveway. The curtains were open this time, and a new car sat in the lot. I stopped and watched the spot where the man used to stand. For a moment I thought I heard my name in the wind, soft and close. When I drove away, the doll sat in my passenger seat like a small accusation. The scratches on the floor and the handprint on the window followed me home in my mind. They were not dry facts I could file away. They were signs that something had stayed, that some part of what we had lived through had rooted itself in places and in me. I told myself I was done looking for closure in old houses. I told myself I would box the doll and keep it somewhere out of sight. But even as I made those plans, I knew the return had not been the last. It had only shown me that whatever touched us had not left. I tried to convince myself that walking away from that house with the doll in my car was the end of it. I boxed the doll the same night and pushed it deep into a closet in my apartment, telling myself it was just wood, fabric, and thread, nothing more. But as the days passed, I began to notice small things again. At first, it was simple. A door I knew I had locked would be cracked open in the morning. A cold patch on the floor near my bed when the rest of the room was warm. Once, I swore I heard faint tapping on the window, steady and patient, the way it had been when I was 10. I pulled the curtains shut and told myself it was only branches, though there were no trees near my building. The more I ignored it, the stronger it became. I'd hear whispers at night, the same low static I remembered from the old closet, as if a radio had been left on somewhere in the dark. Sometimes my brother's words came back to me, the white lady, and I'd feel the air shift in the corner of my room. Other times I'd think of the man in the driveway, his hat pulled low, smiling as if he knew something I didn't. They didn't feel like separate memories anymore. They felt like different faces of the same thing, following, waiting, changing shape to fit whatever door or window it found. I told myself I was grown now, too old to let shadows scare me. I had work, bills, routines. Yet when I turned off the lights at night, all those years folded together in the dark, and I was 9 again, gripping a blanket with every muscle tense. One stormy night, I woke to the sound of my closet door sliding open. I knew I had left it shut. I lay still, holding my breath, waiting for the next sound. The door creaked, slow and deliberate, until I felt the air in the room change. I didn't move, didn't call out, just stared at the ceiling, hoping the noise would stop. Then I heard it, the drag of nails across the floor, the same sound that had once marked the wood beside my childhood bed, the sound that never left me. My body froze the way it always had. For a moment, I thought I saw the outline of a tall figure at the end of the bed, darker than the rest of the room, its head tilted slightly, watching. I blinked hard, and when my eyes adjusted again, there was nothing. The closet door was still, the floor silent. In the morning, I told myself it had been a dream, but when I bent down to put on my shoes, I noticed thin scratches etched into the wood by the bed. They were fresh. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my siblings. I carried it alone the way I always had. But I couldn't shake the thought that maybe we hadn't left that house all those years ago. Maybe it had left with us. Sometimes now, when I can't sleep, I sit by the window and stare at the street below. I watch the sidewalks, half expecting to see a man in a hat standing quietly at the edge of a driveway, smiling, waiting for me to ride past. Other nights, during storms, I'll glance at the closet and imagine a pale figure whispering my name, her voice dry as leaves. I tell myself it's memory, nothing more. That's what people always say when they want to feel safe. But every once in a while, when the apartment is quiet and the lights are out, I hear it again. That steady dragging across the floor, moving closer, stopping right beside me. I never look over the edge of the bed.